Welcome to I'm Your Target Demographic. My name is Adam, and today I want to talk about something that I care about, something I'm interested in. My videos are very eclectic, very diverse. Sometimes I want to talk about religion, sometimes I want to talk about video games. Today, I want to talk about the X-Men. Now, X-Men are really important to me. That's kind of how I got into comic books. I remember in like third, fourth grade, I started getting into X-Men. I started reading Generation X, was kind of the title that brought me in. And now we're kind of at an exciting time where the MCU is established. But there's all these possibilities with the X-Men. There's ways that they can weave them in. So I thought it'd be fun to do kind of my dream. As a fan, what do I want to see? So we're going to pitch here about 10 years of content. We're going to go through what are the arcs we want to see, what are the stories, what are the characters, what do I want to see as a fan of the X-Men? Now, this is going to be similar to how Marvel has tackled the Avengers. That storylines are not going to be exact. There's going to be characters that don't make it. There's going to be characters that are shuffled around. There's going to be origins that are maybe different. We know that the movie versions of these are going to be very different than what the comics gave us. So some of these, you'll see some like, here's the storyline we want to see, but it's going to be different like this. And I'm going to try to maybe find a compromise. Now, when I say we're going to talk about 10 years, I think I've got 27, 28 different movies that we're going to talk about. So kind of the 2 to 3 movies a year sort of schedule. And maybe there's years where there's one big event movie and that's it. There's times that we need to kind of take a moment to breathe between big events. But I think it's around 27, 28 is where we landed. Now, there's also possibilities with Disney Plus, with other ways to give us stories. I'm just talking about movies and kind of what I'd want to see in a 2-hour format or so. So starting at the beginning, I do think we need to set these in a separate universe from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I don't know if it makes sense to merge them. I don't think it makes sense for them just to have been here this whole time. So this whole thing is kind of separated from everything that we know so far. This is its own world where the Avengers are not commonplace. This is a world where superheroes like the X-Men are kind of, people are scared of them. It's hard to imagine, why are people scared of mutants when they love the Hulk? So we're just going to get rid of all that. We're just going to have a separate multiverse where X-Men are kind of the dominant superheroes, and maybe we'd see a big event where they come together. But this is going to be kind of a separate continuity for 10 years of content just for the X-Men. So where do we start? We start with the classic 5. So the first movie, the X-Men, I would pitch Cyclops, Jean, Iceman, Beast, and Angel coming together, young students under Xavier, to learn about their abilities, right? And so we'd kind of see this team form, we'd see dynamics start, we'd kind of learn about those 5. And then for the villain of that first movie, I think to set that precedent for humanity is scared, or maybe even hates mutants, I would have a human enemy like William Stryker. And the group called the Purifiers, which are kind of this extremist group. Get rid of the X-Men. We don't want them here. That's what I'd like to see. Kind of these young heroes struggling to learn how to use their abilities against people that hate them. I think that would send a really strong first message for the X-Men. Now, after we get those first 5, I think it's time to start to learn about some of the other X-Men that are going to come in here. So I would have a couple solo movies to introduce us to these characters that now live in this world but are not part of the original team. So the first one, we're going to start strong and go with Wolverine. We're going to kind of reboot everything we know about Wolverine. This is not going to be Hugh Jackman. This is going to be someone new. Ideally, someone fairly unknown. In this first movie, I want to see Wolverine at his basic, right? Like kind of living on his own, up in Canada, kind of the doesn't know what happened to him, no recollection of Weapon X. And I'd love to see a story featuring the Wendigo. We've never gotten this character. But I think this would be a fun adventure for Wolverine, who doesn't, he's not tackling his past. He's not tackling other characters with adamantium. He is just living his life up there, and the Wendigo shows up. And the Wendigo is a character that is kind of a spin on like a curse in some mythologies, that this person kind of becomes the Wendigo, and it's terrorizing and killing people. So Wolverine would try to track this character, stop them, be the hero, right? But it'd be pretty small scale. Wolverine by himself up in Canada. Our second solo movie here would then feature Colossus. So we'd see a kind of story set in Russia with him and his younger sister, Ilyana. And so we'd get to know them as characters and kind of show a different version of the X-Men are very, kind of out saving people. They're wearing costumes. Colossus at this time and place is trying to keep his ability hidden because people hate them. And so it's kind of him trying to save people but not become a public thing. I would pit him against a villain that we have not seen in the movies, Omega Red. Militarizing people against the civilians in a certain place, and so Colossus has to stand up against them and kind of eventually become the hero that would then join the X-Men. Ilyana, we get teases about what she is capable of for future projects. You're going to see a big theme here is introducing characters throughout that then become bigger deals. They then join teams. So building kind of the foundational stuff here in other films. So we have Colossus, and then we'd also have another solo movie starring Storm. Now, Storm, this would have a younger Storm, kind of in Africa, ideally like Kenya or Egypt. She has stories in both. But she is kind of the young thief, again, trying to keep her powers somewhat hidden from folks. There are some stories where she's kind of worshipped as a goddess. We could play into that a little bit if there's people that do find out about her. But now, I was trying to think what would be an interesting story with Storm. And there is an interesting take that we could do here featuring the villain Arcade, who has never been in the movies. Arcade is essentially kind of like a Saw sort of character that sets up these dangerous obstacles and games that our characters have to go through. And so we could have a kind of rich character who's finding mutants from kind of these like poverty-stricken locations that no one's gonna miss, right? Put them into these games and see if they survive. So I'd love to see Arcade, kind of that diabolical sort of character. And then we can introduce a couple other characters in here to kind of supplement Storm. And so it'd be a group of characters struggling to survive in this game. And so I think this would be a cool place to introduce Nightcrawler, because I don't know if there's enough for like a Nightcrawler solo movie, but he could be a supporting character here. I could see some younger characters that would populate some of our other teams. I thought it'd be interesting to see a couple characters that would show up in New Mutants once they're a little older. So we could introduce Sunspot here, who kind of has the ability to kind of radiate like solar energy and heat. And then a character called Karma, who can kind of possess other people and kind of take over their bodies. And so this kind of ragtag group of younger mutants, and then Storm would probably be the oldest, so she would kind of take this leadership position to get this group out of these games alive. Then setting her up to join the X-Men when the time comes. So I thought that'd be a cool spin for a Storm film. So now let's say it's been about a year and a half since the first X-Men. We now have a couple new characters, but they've not joined the team. So we now have the X-Men too. And this is going to be a play on the giant-sized X-Men, which is where our original team is kind of captured and this new team comes together to go rescue them. So they would bring in Wolverine, Colossus, Storm. And then in this version that I'm pitching, we bring in Warpath, who would be new to this film. And then introduce Danny Moonstar alongside him, who will show up in New Mutants. So this team has to go rescue the originals and kind of get them out. Now, the original storyline featured an island called Krakoa, which is kind of a living island. If they were going to continue using Krakoa, this would be a place to start. But if they wanted something a little bit more grounded, we could base this on one of the stories that takes place in Genosha, which is a kind of island where mutants are captured and enslaved, usually by humans, and then kind of our new team would come and rescue them, and then Genosha kind of becomes something else later. But that might be a more grounded and realistic portrayal as opposed to immediately introducing a living island. So either of those could have the team come in, rescue the originals, and now we have kind of this huge slate of characters that can kind of come in and out of these X-Men films. Now we get a couple more solo films after kind of the big event movie. We get some new characters. We're going to get a Gambit solo film. So this is focusing on the Thieves Guild and him kind of, stealing and like kind of heist sort of movie. But he needs a heist. And so there's an interesting story that does not relate to Gambit that could be woven in here. Now, we have a character called Banshee, who is also an X-Men. We could introduce Banshee and his biggest rival, Black Tom Cassidy. Now, Black Tom Cassidy and Banshee, Sean Cassidy, are cousins. And there's a story where Black Tom takes Banshee's daughter, kind of kidnaps her, tries to raise her, tries to use her. She eventually becomes a character called Siren. Both Siren and Banshee have kind of the ability to kind of scream and destroy things with their vocal powers, and they can fly. So imagine if Banshee is trying to get his daughter back, but he maybe doesn't have the means to. He's going to hire Gambit and kind of the Thieves Guild to get his daughter back. So now we have kind of this heist setup. It gives Gambit a way to use his abilities, kind of still be a little morally gray, but be doing the good thing by trying to save Banshee's daughter. And it could even be a reveal late in the film that it's even a person he's trying to rescue. And then it sets Siren up to join a team in the future. So that'd be an interesting adventure for Gambit to go on. Our next solo movie is Bishop. Now, this movie is going to take place in the future. So we see Bishop and his sister Shard kind of fighting against the Sentinels and kind of robotic life forms and things that have taken over and kind of hunted down mutants in the future. Now, we have some characters that could also show up in the future. So we would feature Wolverine, barely aged, right? We also have an older version of Gambit, which plays an important part in the comic storyline. And so we'd get the Gambit film, and then we'd see a version of him, 40, 50 years older. So we'd see Gambit. Then we also should see someone else. And so I would pitch maybe an introduction to Kitty Pryde, Shadowcat, an older version of her that we would then see show up kind of younger, right? And so we're not only getting young characters that will join, but we can look into the future and see characters first and then are introduced to their current day counterpart. That could be really interesting. And so the movie would see them trying to survive, figure out who created the Sentinels, how do we stop this? And then kind of the last act of the movie would feature Bishop coming into current time and maybe discovering current day Gambit and the nuances that could play out in a story like that. So that would be introducing kind of time travel, different versions of characters. Could be really interesting that way. Now for our next movie, the X-Men are going to be fighting the Sentinels a lot, but not only good characters need to be fighting for their lives here. So I'd want to see a Magneto-centric movie about Magneto and the kind of formation of the Brotherhood. So kind of taking all these villains, and then in this movie, they would be the heroes, right? They're trying to stop the Sentinels in current day, maybe using information that Bishop brought back. And so we'd kind of see Magneto, Juggernaut, Mystique, Sabretooth, which we will see again soon. And then the character Quicksilver, which is actually one of Magneto's, for a long time was one of Magneto's children. We could play into maybe them believing that. We could keep that as the truth. Who knows what that could be. But Quicksilver is kind of a prominent character in the Brotherhood, especially the early Brotherhood. So we kind of see that team, get to know them against the Sentinels, and then these villains would then show up later, right? So we're just planting seeds so that in a future movie, when Sabretooth shows up, you know who this is. You know who Juggernaut is. And so this is kind of us getting to know Magneto, his maybe difference in mentality than Professor X. And so this could be a cool look at the villains, but as the heroes of their own story. Next up, we're going to have a film about Magik, Illyana Rasputin. So this is Colossus's little sister. We got a tease earlier that she has some sort of abilities. Now, Magik, her story is crazy and could be an incredible movie where she is kind of taken to this realm of essentially demons called Limbo, and she is kind of trained and she grows up in this space. And so then by the time she returns to us, she's older and she's mastered her abilities. And so she can kind of go on this crazy side adventure and then kind of come back out in a place where she's kind of ready to kick ass and take names. So that could be really cool to see. Now, this is where things are going to get a little wild, because now we're going to start talking about post-credits and teases for what's going to come in the future. And the big bad for kind of this first big portion of the X-Men cinematic universe, or whatever they would call it, I would pitch as being Apocalypse. Now, Apocalypse could have multiple movies. There could be a lot of things that play in here. And this might kind of clean up that, fix that bad taste in our mouth from the previous Apocalypse movie. So the post-credit of Magik, I would have Magik being recruited by Apocalypse. And primarily she has kind of this inner demon, kind of a alter ego called Darkchild. And so Apocalypse could maybe want to harness that, and that would give her a reason to actually be kind of a sketchy, bad character. And so she would be kind of hinted as the first Horseman. And so now the audience would be like, oh my God, we're getting Apocalypse, right? That would be such a cool post-credit. So now our next movie, we're going to get a sequel to Wolverine. So we're going to get the Wolverine 2. And this is where we're going to introduce, we're going to bring back Sabretooth. He was kind of a henchman. He was a supporting character in the Brotherhood movie. Now we're going to really get to know him. We're going to get to know Wolverine more, and we're going to start to dig into that Weapon X stuff. What was their relationship? Why do they hate each other? And so we're going to kind of get a lot of that story and that rivalry that we want to see. The end credit for the Wolverine 2 is going to be Wolverine, his feral berserker self, being recruited by Apocalypse. And recruited is maybe a weird word, right? Because he can kind of just take people. And so he might just make Wolverine one of his horsemen. There is precedent for this. Wolverine has been a horseman in the comics. And so we would see this like, oh, damn, like it's not just bad guys. It's like our heroes are becoming horsemen. This is going to be crazy. Up next, we're going to get a sequel to Storm. So we're going to get Storm 2, the Morlocks. So now we're going to start to dive into other mutants that are not heroes. They're not on the streets. They can't fit in with society, and we're going to get to know the Morlocks. There's a couple arcs here that we can kind of tap in to create a story. One of them is a story called Mutant Massacre, where the Morlocks are kind of attacked and killed, a lot of them, by a character called Mr. Sinister. So we're going to get a tease from Mr. Sinister, okay? And then his team, the Marauders, who are kind of these just horrible bad guys that are going to kind of try to kill all the Morlocks. Now, Storm kind of will lead a charge to protect them, save them. She eventually will fight against the Morlock leader, Callisto. Callisto is kind of their queen, right? Their leader. But Storm will win and kind of take over the Morlocks and help protect them. Now, this leaves a bad taste in Callisto's mouth, who in the post-credits will be recruited by Apocalypse. So Callisto will become one of the Horsemen, while Storm kind of has this protection over the Morlocks. So at this point, we have 3 horsemen. Okay, we've got Wolverine, we've got Magik, and we've got Callisto. So now we're going to see the actual X-Men Apocalypse film, which will open with recruiting the 4th and final horseman, Angel, one of the original 5. He's probably been in a couple of these movies. He's been around. But Apocalypse is just going to ruin this guy. He's going to turn him into what's called the Archangel, which we haven't really seen done well. So here it would be kind of a much darker turn, and Archangel would kind of lead, the other horsemen and kind of go on this huge battle, try to destroy the Earth. All of the characters that we've met so far would show up. So the original X-Men, some of the new X-Men, Bishop, Gambit could show up. Some of these characters we've introduced would all come together for this big event film to face off against Apocalypse and his 4 horsemen. So we kind of get this big thing. We would also, because of the tease of Mr. Sinister and Apocalypse often kind of roam in the same circles. They kind of work with and or for each other. So we would see kind of Sinister showing up here, maybe without the full get up. He kind of looks like a scientist. He looks like just like a normal dude. But then we start to get teases that he's doing stuff behind the scenes. And so Sinister would also play a part in this adventure. In this Apocalypse film, we also are introduced to Cable, another time traveler who hopefully we can differentiate enough from Bishop that the future is not about Sentinels with Cable. With Cable, the future is about Apocalypse. And so he can maybe be the instigator at the beginning of the film to teach people what's going on, what they need to be careful about. And then he will eventually kind of stay in this timeline following this movie. So we'll get to know Cable here. Ultimately, the X-Men will win. Spoiler alert. But the post-credit here will be Xavier realizing that there are so many threats in the world. There are dangerous mutants everywhere, and there need to be more teams. So this is going to allude to kind of the next phase, which will be creating all of these kind of offshoots that X-Men are known for, right? There's tons of X teams, and so this will kind of be Xavier realizing we need more people, we need more help. So up next, we've got X Factor. This is a team that has been not really featured anywhere. I think they had 1 episode of the animated series. But these are characters that have not really been widely introduced. So we're going to start with Havoc, who is Cyclops' brother, who did feature in kind of the X-Men First Class movies. So we're going to get Havoc. We're going to get Siren, who was Banshee's daughter, showed up before. We're going to get Quicksilver, who is Magneto's son, maybe. So he's going to show up. We're going to get a character called Multiple Man. And then our last character is going to be Polaris. Polaris is also a daughter of Magneto and has very similar abilities, so kind of magnetism, things like that. And so that will be kind of our original team of X Factor. I know with a lot of these teams, there's going to be people that don't make the cut. Just because in a span of a movie, you can't introduce 8 new characters and do them well. So typically you're going to see, I'm recommending like 3 or 4 or 5 characters at a time, just to kind of learn about them and really focus on quality as opposed to quantity. So that'll be our initial X Factor team. And then for them, they've done a lot, but it could be cool here to see them kind of cover the Savage Land arcs. So send that team to kind of this wild place called the Savage Land, which is kind of filled with dinosaurs and dangerous mutants, and Mr. Sinister tends to use this as kind of a testing ground. He has like laboratories there, and so we can further that Sinister arc if they have to face some of his Marauders, which is like his kind of Brotherhood version. They can face off against them in the Savage Land. Up next, we're going to see Rogue and Gambit. So we've already gotten a Gambit solo film. He's probably showed up in some other places. I don't imagine Rogue would have, and so this movie will introduce her as a member of the Brotherhood. So we'll see some of those other Brotherhood villains kind of show up here. Rogue is part of them. Gambit is starting to kind of change his ways. He's still maybe thieving a little bit, and so this will be him meeting Rogue and getting her to turn good. Because he was kind of sketchy before, she was a bad guy before, and so this could be them kind of bonding, getting to know each other, and then eventually joining the X-Men. Up next, we get the New Mutants. Hopefully by this point it's been long enough that people have forgotten the other New Mutants. And so here we're going to get a story about some other younger characters learning to use their abilities. So X-Factor might have been kind of a more established, they characters that know how to use their abilities. This is very much characters that are young, teens, don't really know what they're doing. So for this lineup, we would see Danny Moonstar, who we met earlier in X-Men 2. We would see Magik, kind of after she is no longer a Horseman of Apocalypse. She needs to be trained, she needs to be taught. She would show up here. And then we'd see Karma, who we saw in Storm in Arcade's Dangerous Things. So we'd see all these characters that we've met come together. Oh, Sunspot too. Sunspot and Karma were both with Arcade. So we'd see them, and then we'd see a new character, Cypher, who can kind of translate languages, speak to people, machines, things like that. So we'd see these people get to know each other, learn about what they can do, and then have them face some sort of threat here. So now we need more teams. We're going to get an X-Force movie led by Cable, who has stayed in this timeline. We're going to get Warpath, who showed up in X-Men 2 and maybe has been around. We're going to get Colossus, has been part of X-Force. We're going to meet a couple new characters like Domino and Forge. Forge, I don't think, has ever been in live action, so that could be really cool. And so this team is, there's been a couple different X-Force arcs, but my favorites are always when they're kind of the Black Ops secret. They need to get something done that is maybe morally not, like we can't be seen here doing this. So they send to X-Force to kind of go under the radar, get it done, and come back. And so here we'd see them maybe tackle some sort of like, someone needs to be taken out, something needs to be stolen. This is the team that's going to do it. Now, this is also an interesting chance to develop Cable more, and so I would pitch the villain of this as a character called Strife, which could be a big reveal partway through that it is a clone of Cable. And so Strife kind of is Cable without training wheels. Like he's able to kind of do everything that Cable can't or doesn't know how to, or is being restrained. Strife can kind of do all that. And so I think the arc that this could be based on is called Executioner's Song. Kind of starting to now weave in this whole cloning sort of thing. What is Sinister doing? Tying to Cable and his parents. There's a lot of interesting stuff that this movie could start to develop. You're seeing a theme here that these movies aren't, everything about Cable is now in this film. It's not doing it justice. And we've seen in the MCU a lot of stories have been truncated, shortened, just don't mean as much when it's done in an hour and a half. So here we'd see kind of this whole clone storyline kind of come and go through a lot of these films. And so X-Force would introduce Strife, introduce a lot of these things in the context of X-Force doing some sort of mission, maybe somewhat related to that. And I've got one more team, at least in this phase of movies. So we're going to see Excalibur. Excalibur is basically a X-Men team that takes place in the UK and kind of covers that region. They tend to be a little bit more mystical, facing off against magic and sorcerers. And so the Excalibur team that I would see here would bring in Kitty Pryde, current day Kitty Pryde. Not sure if she's shown up before. This could be her introduction. Nightcrawler, who we've seen before, could show up here. Introducing a brother-sister pair called Captain Britain and his sister Psylocke. There's a lot that we could cover with those characters. They have extensive and complicated backstories. We could explain them here. And then we'd pair this group up with the villains called the Hellfire Club. And the Hellfire Club is like a long-standing secret society of mutants who kind of want power, and they want to kind of be able to do extravagant things. And so there's really powerful people kind of in this inner circle of characters kind of pulling the strings on a lot. So we'd get to know them, and they're probably trying to do something that Excalibur needs to stop. Now, a prominent member of the Hellfire Club is called the White Queen, Emma Frost, who is a character that we need to establish here so that she can then show up and do other stuff throughout these movies. So she kind of, comes and goes into the X-Men. And so this would establish her as a villain, but then, give her reason to come back into the X-Men when necessary. So we've had some kind of team movies, but now it's time for another big summer blockbuster, another where these movies all come together, and we're going to get X-Men Sinister. So now we're going to kind of meet the full Mr. Sinister. We're going to see his motivations. We're going to see why he's been doing this. We're going to kind of connect all the dots with Scott Summers and Cyclops and Madeline Pryor, who is a clone that Sinister creates, and then they eventually have a son who is Cable in the future who comes back. So this movie will kind of be very Cyclops focused, very Jean Grey / Madeline Pryor focused, and kind of have all of this stuff going on. Sinister's lackeys, the Marauders, so a bunch of villains will be in this. This would be kind of a big thing to kind of wrap up this kind of cloning, all these cloning shenanigans. This would be the place to cover that. So now following that, we're also going to get an X-Men film that now takes our heroes into space. Because the X-Men surprisingly have a lot of cosmic stories. And so here we're going to get a scary movie, an alien movie called X-Men The Brood. And the Brood are kind of a terrifying alien species that we've never seen in live action. So we're trying to really capitalize on things we've never seen, characters we've never really seen done well. And so we're going to see The Brood. So this is going to give probably a pocket of our characters, not a lot of them, a reason to go into space for an adventure. Cyclops will be one of them, and you'll see why in a second. Jean Grey will be one of them, and you'll see why in a second. This could be in response to Sinister, something that happened. They needed to we need to bounce. So they go into space to fight the Brood. The actual Brood storyline will probably be pretty self-contained in this movie, but this will also be the experience that introduces the Phoenix and kind of gives that moment of Jean encountering it and it kind of coming back with her would be part of this story. Now, Cyclops is not going to come back with this team because he's going to encounter a group that we're going to feature in the next movie here called the Starjammers. The Starjammers is headed up by a character called Corsair, who is Cyclops' father. So we're going to get kind of, a story with them kind of traveling space as pirates. This is going to be somewhat kind of connected to a side arc where Cyclops did kind of become a Starjammer for a while. It's complicated because it was actually a different version of Cyclops. But we'll cover that. And then we're going to introduce a third Summers brother. So we've got Havoc and Cyclops. And here we're going to meet Vulcan, who is kind of a character who aspires to become kind of this emperor. And he eventually does become emperor. And so we can have kind of this intergalactic power struggle. We can introduce some other alien species. And Cyclops is kind of with the Starjammers as they navigate all of this. So we kind of see some really cool cosmic stuff that we have not seen the X-Men do in live action before. Now, it's been a while since we've seen what Magneto's up to. So we're going to get an X-Men film, X-Men The Acolytes. And the Acolytes is a kind of team that Magneto recruits and then takes to a base that I believe is built on the moon called Avalon. And it's kind of his new headquarters. And kind of his group. And so we're going to see Colossus kind of turn and side with Magneto for a little bit. We're going to see his daughter Polaris go with him, maybe Quicksilver. We're going to see a character called Fabian Cortez who is going to kind of try to backstab him. So we're going to see some kind of political stuff with Magneto in this group. That he's kind of sick of Earth sucks, I'm bouncing. And they kind of do this whole thing. There is an arc that this could be roughly based on called Fatal Attractions, which one of the most notable moments and something that would be awesome on screen is when Magneto forcibly removes the adamantium from Wolverine, pulls it all out of him. So we could see that on screen, which would be wild. So next up, we get Wolverine 3. He does not have his adamantium anymore, so he's now kind of struggling to figure out what does that mean. He could be looking for the Weapon X facility. How do I get it back? And then this is going to be the introduction of a young mutant called Jubilee, who is often a sidekick of Wolverine. They have kind of this bond together. And so it could be him trying to protect her kind of without the weapons that he's used to. And she kind of gets dragged along on this journey with him. Now, we could do X-23 as that sidekick kind of character, but I feel like that's too similar to Logan. We want to kind of separate those stories. And Jubilee has never been done, really only in name in live action. And so this could be a chance to kind of develop her there. And then also kind of dive into more of that Weapon X stuff and get him some closure where he likely gets his adamantium back somehow. Up next, we're going to get another X Factor movie. So we're going to bring that team back and we're going to go to Mojoworld. So we're kind of in the cosmic stuff. We've had a lot of these kind of wild stories. There's a villain called Mojo who is likely impossible to bring to life in live action, but that'd be awesome to see. And so they're going to go to Mojoworld, where it's like a reality show where he kind of like Arcade puts them through crazy stuff, but televises it to the world. And here we're going to meet the character Longshot, who will, by the end of this film, kind of defect against Mojo and travel with X Factor back to Earth. And so that's kind of introducing him and his backstory and then taking him back. And now we're going to get a second New Mutants movie. And this one is going to introduce a character called Warlock, who is an alien species that looks wild. I'm not sure in live action what it would look like. And he is a member of a techno-organic species that could kind of infect living beings, but they kind of make them into this hive mind, kind of semi-robotic sort of alien species. It's most known to me through an arc called the Phalanx Covenant. The Phalanx is kind of what they are called as a group when they infect a bunch of people. And so this arc could see one lone character, Warlock, try to help the New Mutants figure this out. We could have other X teams involved in this to kind of stop this techno-organic disease from infecting people. And it seeks out mutants, and so this could also be the introduction of our next movie, Generation X. Kind of the new young folks, because New Mutants are now going to be a little older. So now the new class, Generation X, super young, inexperienced, don't know what they're doing. In the comics, they were led by Banshee and the White Queen, who is now a good guy. So we'd see the two of them try to mentor this group of young mutants. For this team, I love this team so much, and so it's a tough call. But I would put Jubilee, who we've met, and then a few new characters, Chamber, who has psionic energy that comes out of his chest, Sync, who can kind of take other people's abilities when he's around them, kind of like Rogue, but not to the extent of Rogue. And then a character called M and a character called Penance. And it'd probably be their relationship and their storyline that would be the kind of core storyline of this movie is eventually, I'm not going to get into it here, but there's a storyline that could be really interesting to build up M and Penance as characters. So that would be a really cool movie. Up next, we've got another big everyone come together movie, X-Men, The Dark Phoenix Saga. So we've introduced the Hellfire Club. They are going to kind of take Jean Grey, who is now the host of the Phoenix, and kind of try to use her for evil, right? And so try to get what they want. They are very powerful, but the Phoenix is more powerful. And so it'd be the story of that temptation. Hopefully a globe-spanning major event as opposed to the really underwhelming stories that we've gotten of the Phoenix in live action before. So this would be huge. Everyone, lots of villains, lots of people coming in and out of this. Kind of the big thing for a couple years would be the Dark Phoenix saga. But then I have one more movie idea. And this is kind of as far as my arcs got. And I was thinking about, like, what else do I want to see? And I want to see the Age of Apocalypse. So the last movie I'm pitching here, and this would be like 10 years in, we've met all these characters, we've had all these adventures, all these journeys. Now we see a story where Professor X is killed. His own son, Legion, accidentally kills him. He goes back in time, accidentally kills him. So that means Apocalypse. We've seen Apocalypse lose, but now Apocalypse is going to win because there's no Xavier. There's no X-Men. And so now we see an alternate reality where Magneto leads all these groups, kind of took up the mantle, is a little bit more militaristic, and we see variants of all these characters that we love. Like, in the MCU, we really haven't gotten to see Tony Stark, like a variant of him, or at least the same characters playing different versions. We don't get to see that a lot. Multiverse of Madness was kind of just the starting point for that. So it'd be wild to see an entire movie where the Wolverine we see is very different. We now see Sabretooth as a hero. It's just a wild, wild version. And so we get a whole movie of them trying to face off against Apocalypse, kind of culminating with the time traveler Bishop going back in time to protect Xavier and kind of restore that timeline. So that would be buck wild to see in live action. So that was like 27, 28 movies that would last about 10 years, which is about how long the MCU has lasted. There's all these possibilities. There are characters that I love that we didn't even really get to touch on. There's moments that I know I want to see, but I'm not sure where. Like, I really want to see Colossus. I'd love to see him wear the Juggernaut armor. That would be wild. The Wolverine getting his adamantium taken out would be wild. I want to see Rogue actually be Rogue. She was in so many X-Men movies and never did anything that was remotely as cool as what she can do. Like, I want to see her take 4 different people's abilities and then wreck someone. So there's so many cool things that the X-Men can do. So that's just my pitch for what I want to see. If I was in a room with Kevin Feige and he said, how should we do this? That's what I would say. What are the moments that you want to see? What are the movies that you want to make sure happen? So let me know your thoughts. This was just one guy nerding out over something that he loves. So hopefully you found this at least interesting. Would you watch that slate of movies? Let me know. And let me know what things you would do if you were in charge. If they said, what do you want to do? And you had free reign, what would you do? So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.